She stood in front of the entire family during Easter brunch and called me a shameless gold digger who was bleeding her precious son dry. What she didn't realize was that by the time dessert was served, everyone would know exactly who was really supporting whom in this family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diana Walsh, and I never imagined that a peaceful Easter morning would become the day I finally exposed the truth about my marriage to my husband's insufferable family. For 3 years, I had endured Patricia Brennan's snide comments, passive-aggressive remarks, and outright hostility toward me. She made it clear from day one that she believed I had trapped her golden boy son into marriage for his money. If only she knew the reality of our financial situation. The irony was so thick you could cut it with the carving knife Patricia used to slice the honey-glazed ham that morning. There I sat at the beautifully decorated dining table in the Brennan family estate in Westchester County, surrounded by David's siblings and their spouses, listening to Patricia hold court about family values and financial responsibility. The woman who hadn't worked a day in her life since marrying David's father was lecturing everyone about the importance of contributing to society and not being a burden on hardworking men. David sat beside me, his jaw clenched as his mother's words grew more pointed with each passing minute. He knew what was coming. We both did. Patricia had been building up to this moment for weeks, ever since she learned that David and I had declined to contribute to the family's annual charity auction fundraiser. What she didn't know was that we couldn't afford to donate because I had been quietly paying David's student loans, credit card debt, and even his car payment for the past 18 months. The Brennan family lived in a world where appearances mattered more than reality. Their sprawling Tudor-style mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with a tennis court and swimming pool that Patricia loved to mention whenever she wanted to emphasize the family's status. The house had been in the family for 3 generations, a constant reminder of old money and established wealth that Patricia wielded like a weapon against anyone she deemed unworthy of the Brennan name. What the family didn't realize was that maintaining their lifestyle had become increasingly difficult. David's father, Richard, had made some poor investment decisions in recent years, and while they still lived comfortably, the reality was far different from the image they projected. David himself was drowning in debt from his failed attempt at starting a tech company right after college, followed by an expensive MBA program that hadn't led to the high-paying career his mother had expected. When I met David 3.5 years ago at a medical conference in Chicago, I was a successful pharmaceutical sales representative, earning 6 figures while he was working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm, barely making ends meet. Our connection was immediate and genuine, built on shared interests in hiking, cooking, and our mutual love of rescue dogs. He was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest about his struggles, which made his mother's assumption that he was some kind of financial catch-all the more absurd. The morning started innocently enough. I had arrived early to help Patricia with the final preparations, hoping to bridge the gap between us through a shared activity. She had grudgingly accepted my offer to arrange the flower centerpieces, while she focused on the meal preparation. The dining room looked spectacular, with its antique mahogany table set for 12 and adorned with my carefully crafted arrangements of white lilies and pale yellow roses. David's sister Caroline arrived with her husband Marcus and their twin daughters, followed by his brother James with his wife Sophie and their teenage son. The conversation flowed easily during the initial gathering, with everyone catching up on work, school, and recent travel. I genuinely enjoyed spending time with David's siblings, who had always been welcoming and kind to me. It was only Patricia who seemed determined to maintain her hostile stance. The first hint of trouble came when Caroline complimented the beautiful flower arrangements, and Patricia made a point of mentioning that they were my contribution to the meal preparation. Her tone carried just enough edge to suggest that arranging flowers was the extent of my domestic capabilities, a subtle dig at my career-focused lifestyle. David's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in support. As we moved into the dining room for brunch, Patricia had orchestrated the seating arrangement with military precision. She placed herself at the head of the table with Richard at the opposite end, positioning David and me directly across from her where she could maintain visual contact throughout the meal. I recognized the strategic placement immediately, but chose to ignore it, determined not to let her tactics ruin what should have been a pleasant family gathering. The conversation during the first course centered on Caroline's recent promotion to partner at her law firm and James's success with his architectural practice. Both siblings had clearly inherited their father's business acumen and had built impressive careers in their respective fields. Patricia beamed with pride as she spoke about their accomplishments, making sure to emphasize how well both children had done for themselves financially. When the topic naturally shifted to David's work at the investment firm, I watched his posture tense slightly. He had been hoping for a promotion that hadn't materialized, and his current salary barely covered his basic living expenses, let alone the debt payments that consumed most of his income. Patricia seemed oblivious to his discomfort as she launched into her usual speech about the importance of financial planning and building wealth for the future. The conversation took a more pointed turn when Richard mentioned the upcoming charity auction and asked about our contribution for this year's event. The Brennan family had a long tradition of supporting various local charities, and each couple was expected to donate something valuable for the auction. Last year, Caroline and Marcus had contributed a week at their vacation home in the Hamptons, while James and Sophie had donated a custom architectural consultation worth several $1,000s. David cleared his throat nervously and explained that we would be sitting out this year's auction due to some unexpected expenses. He kept his explanation vague, not wanting to go into details about his financial struggles in front of the entire family. I admired his attempt to maintain his dignity while being honest about our situation, but I could see Patricia's expression hardening with each word. The silence that followed his explanation was deafening. Patricia set down her fork with deliberate precision and fixed her gaze on me with an intensity that made everyone else at the table uncomfortable. I could feel the shift in atmosphere as conversations halted and all attention focused on our end of the table. Even the children seemed to sense the tension building between us. Patricia's voice was deceptively calm when she finally spoke, but I recognized the dangerous undertone that preceded her most cutting remark. She began by expressing her disappointment that we wouldn't be participating in the family tradition, suggesting that perhaps we needed to reevaluate our priorities and spending habits. Her words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable on the surface while carrying a clear accusation underneath. The attack escalated quickly from there. Patricia questioned whether I truly understood the importance of family obligations and traditions, implying that my own background hadn't prepared me for the responsibilities that came with being part of the Brennan family. She made pointed references to my middle-class upbringing and my parents' modest lifestyle, contrasting it with the Brennan family's established position in the community. David attempted to defend me and redirect the conversation, but Patricia was just getting started. She had clearly been planning this confrontation for some time, and she wasn't going to be deterred by her son's protest. Her comments became increasingly personal as she questioned my motivations for marrying David, and suggested that I was more interested in the security his family name provided than in building a genuine partnership. The moment that shattered my composure came when Patricia stood up from her chair and addressed the entire table with theatrical flair. She announced that she could no longer sit quietly and watch as I took advantage of her son's generous nature and kind heart. Her voice grew stronger and more confident as she warmed to her theme, clearly enjoying the attention and the shocked expressions of the other family members. According to Patricia, I was nothing more than a calculating gold digger who had identified David as an easy target and manipulated him into marriage through false promises and emotional manipulation. She painted a picture of me as a scheming opportunist who was bleeding her son dry while contributing nothing meaningful to the relationship or the family. The accusations were so far from reality that they would have been laughable if they hadn't been delivered with such venom and conviction. The room fell completely silent as Patricia's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David's siblings looked horrified by their mother's outburst, while their spouses seemed unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't witnessed the attack. Richard appeared caught between his wife's fury and his obvious discomfort with her public display of hostility toward me. I remained seated throughout Patricia's tirade, my hands folded in my lap and my expression carefully neutral. Years of dealing with difficult clients in pharmaceutical sales had taught me the value of maintaining composure under pressure, and I wasn't going to give Patricia the satisfaction of seeing me break down or respond emotionally to her accusation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Instead, I let her finish her performance while mentally reviewing the evidence I had been gathering for months. David stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He began to defend me passionately, listing my professional accomplishments and personal qualities while demanding that his mother apologize for her unacceptable behavior. His loyalty and love for me were evident in every word, but I could see that his emotional response was only feeding Patricia's sense of righteousness about her intervention. Caroline attempted to mediate by suggesting that everyone calm down and return to enjoying the holiday meal, but Patricia wasn't finished with her accusation. She turned her attention to David, expressing her disappointment in his inability to see through what she characterized as my obvious manipulation tactics. She suggested that he was too trusting and naive to recognize when someone was taking advantage of his good nature. The irony of Patricia's accusations became even more pronounced as she launched into a detailed analysis of our financial situation based on her assumptions and limited knowledge. She was convinced that David was supporting me financially while I contributed nothing to our household expense. She painted a picture of me as a lazy opportunist who had given up any pretense of independence once I had secured marriage to her son. Patricia's confidence in her assessment was absolute, and she seemed genuinely puzzled by David's continued defense of me. In her mind, the evidence was clear and irrefutable. David was a successful young man from a good family who had been trapped by a manipulative woman seeking financial security. The fact that he couldn't see this obvious truth only proved how thoroughly I had deceived him. What Patricia didn't realize was that every accusation she made was not only false but represented the exact opposite of our actual situation. Her dramatic performance was based on assumptions that were so far from reality that they revealed more about her prejudices and limited understanding than they did about our marriage. She had constructed an elaborate fantasy about our relationship that justified her hostility while allowing her to maintain her image as a protective mother looking out for her son's best interest. As Patricia continued her lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of marrying within one's social class, I found myself thinking about the stack of bills sitting on my desk at home. David's name was on most of them, but my bank account was the source of the payments that kept us afloat each month. The irony was so complete that I had to struggle not to smile at the absurdity of the situation. The evidence of our real financial arrangement was meticulously documented in my personal files, bank statements, payment confirmations, loan documents, and credit card bills all told a story that was the complete opposite of Patricia's narrative. I had been keeping detailed records for months, partly out of habit from my business background and partly because I had sensed that this confrontation was inevitable. David's student loan payments alone consumed nearly a third of his monthly salary, a burden that Patricia seemed completely unaware of despite her intimate knowledge of his educational expenses. The private MBA program she had encouraged him to pursue had cost over $200,000, and the payments were scheduled to continue for another 15 years. On top of that, his failed business venture had left him with significant credit card debt that carried crushing interest rates. My own financial situation was substantially stronger, thanks to a combination of smart career choices, careful budgeting, and a generous commission structure that rewarded high performance. My annual income exceeded David's by nearly 50%, and I had built up substantial savings before we met. When David's financial struggles became apparent early in our relationship, I had quietly begun helping with his expenses without making a big issue of it. The decision to support David financially had been an easy one for me. I loved him deeply and recognized that his current struggles were temporary setbacks, rather than character flaws. His business venture had failed due to market conditions rather than poor planning, and his MBA would eventually lead to better opportunities. In the meantime, I was happy to help carry the financial burden while he worked to rebuild his career. What made Patricia's accusations particularly galling was her complete ignorance of the sacrifices I had made to support her son. I had turned down a lucrative job offer in California that would have meant a significant salary increase because David couldn't afford to relocate. I had postponed plans to buy a larger home because our combined finances were stretched thin by his debt payments. I had even declined expensive vacation opportunities to ensure we could meet our monthly obligation. The documentation I had assembled over the past year painted a clear picture of our financial reality. My bank statements showed regular transfers to David's accounts to cover his loan payments, while his statements showed the corresponding payments to various creditors. The paper trail was comprehensive and irrefutable, covering everything from his car payment to his health insurance premiums. Patricia's assumptions about our lifestyle were equally misguided. She seemed to believe that David was supporting me in luxury while I contributed nothing to our household expenses. The reality was that I paid the majority of our living costs, including rent, utilities, groceries, and even the expensive wine we brought to family gatherings. David's income barely covered his debt payments and personal expenses, leaving little room for household contributions. The contrast between perception and reality extended beyond our immediate finances to our future planning as well. Patricia often spoke about the importance of building wealth and planning for retirement, apparently assuming that David was well on his way to financial success. She was unaware that his retirement contributions had been suspended for over a year to free up money for debt payments, while I continued to maximize my own 401k contributions, and had even opened additional investment accounts. As Patricia's lecture continued, I found myself calculating the total amount I had contributed to David's financial stability over the past 18 months. The number was substantial enough to make her accusations not just wrong but almost comically misguided. I had essentially been functioning as David's primary financial support while maintaining the fiction that we were equal partners in all expenses. The family dynamics that had led to this moment were complex and long-standing. Patricia had always been protective of her children, but her relationship with David was particularly intense. As the youngest child and only son, he had been the focus of her ambitions and expectations from an early age. She had invested heavily in his education and career development, and she expected a return on that investment in the form of financial success and social advancement. My presence in David's life represented a threat to Patricia's vision of his future in ways that went beyond simple mother-in-law jealousy. She had imagined him marrying someone from their social circle, someone whose family background and financial resources would complement and enhance the Brennan family status. My middle-class origins and independent career path didn't fit into her carefully constructed plans for her son's life. The timing of Patricia's attack was also significant. The charity auction was just one of several recent events that had highlighted our financial limitations, and her growing suspicion that something was wrong with David's circumstance. She had noticed our absence from expensive family activities, and our careful approach to discretionary spending, and she had drawn her own conclusions about the cause of these changes. What Patricia failed to understand was that David's financial struggles were not the result of poor character or bad decisions, but rather the consequence of pursuing the ambitious goals she had set for him. The MBA program she had encouraged, the business venture she had supported, and the lifestyle expectations she had instilled, had all contributed to his current situation. Her criticism of our financial choices ignored her own role in creating the circumstances that led to our difficulty. The emotional toll of maintaining this financial arrangement while enduring Patricia's constant criticism had been considerable. I had sacrificed my own financial goals and personal dreams to support the man I loved, only to be accused of the exact opposite behavior. The injustice of the situation was compounded by my inability to defend myself without violating David's privacy and dignity. David's siblings had begun to suspect that something was amiss with their mother's assessment of our situation, but they lacked the complete information needed to understand the true dynamics of our relationship. Caroline had made subtle inquiries about our finances during private conversations, clearly concerned about her brother's well-being, but unsure how to help. James had offered several times to include us in family investments or business opportunities, sensing that we might need additional income sources. The extended family's perception of our relationship had been shaped primarily by Patricia's negative commentary and their own limited observations during family gatherings. They saw a successful young couple who seemed happy together but appeared to be struggling financially, and they naturally assumed that David's expenses were the primary burden. The idea that I might be the primary breadwinner in a relationship simply didn't occur to them, given their traditional expectations about gender roles and family dynamics. As Patricia's Easter performance reached its crescendo, I realized that the time had finally come to reveal the truth about our situation. The documentation I had assembled was comprehensive enough to withstand any scrutiny, and the family deserved to know the real story behind our financial choices. More importantly, David deserved to be defended from his mother's unfair accusations, even if it meant exposing private details about our marriage. The decision to fight back was both liberating and terrifying. I had spent months preparing for this moment while hoping it would never come, but Patricia's public attack had made a response inevitable. The evidence was overwhelming, the truth was on my side, and I had the documentation to prove every aspect of our real financial arrangement. What Patricia didn't realize as she concluded her dramatic speech was that she had just provided me with the perfect opportunity to expose not only her ignorance about our situation, but also her own family's financial vulnerability. The research I had conducted into the Brennan family finances had revealed some interesting inconsistencies between their public image and their private reality, and I was prepared to use that information if necessary. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the family's understanding of our relationship and expose the truth about who was really supporting whom in our marriage. Patricia's confidence in her accusations was about to be shattered by the weight of documented evidence, and the golden boy she thought she was protecting was about to be revealed as the beneficiary of his wife's financial generosity rather than the victim of her greed. As I prepared to respond to Patricia's attack, I thought about all the sacrifices I had made to support David and our relationship. The late nights working extra accounts to increase my commission income, the declined social invitations to save money for his payments, the delayed personal goals to prioritize his financial recovery. Every sacrifice had been worth it, because I loved him, but Patricia's accusations made it clear that my efforts had gone completely unrecognized and unappreciated. The moment had arrived to set the record straight, to defend my integrity, and reveal the truth about our marriage. Patricia had gambled her reputation and family relationships on assumptions that were not only wrong but spectacularly misguided. The documentation in my purse would prove every aspect of our real financial arrangement, and expose her dramatic accusations as the vindictive fiction they really were. David looked at me with a mixture of love, embarrassment, and helpless frustration as his mother's attack reached its conclusion. He had no idea that I had been preparing for this moment for months, gathering evidence, and building an irrefutable case that would not only defend our relationship, but potentially reshape the entire family's understanding of financial responsibility and mutual support. The Easter brunch that had started as a pleasant family gathering was about to become the setting for a revelation that would expose years of misunderstanding and reveal the true dynamics of our marriage. Patricia's confidence in her accusations was absolute, but she was about to discover that her assumptions about gold diggers and financial manipulation had been aimed at entirely the wrong target. I reached into my purse with deliberate calm while Patricia stood there basking in what she believed was her moment of triumph. The leather folder I withdrew contained 18 months of meticulously organized financial documentation that would systematically dismantle every assumption she had just voiced with such theatrical confidence. Her eyes narrowed as she watched me place the folder on the pristine white tablecloth, clearly wondering what I could possibly have that would counter her devastating accusation. The first document I extracted was David's most recent student loan statement, showing a balance of $187,000 with monthly payments of $2,200. I placed it directly in front of Patricia, watching her expression shift from smug satisfaction to confused uncertainty as she processed what she was seeing. The payment history clearly showed that every single payment for the past year had been made from an account bearing my name alone. Patricia's confident demeanor began to crack as I laid out document after document with surgical precision. David's credit card statements revealed another layer of financial burden that his mother had been completely unaware of, with balances totaling over $40,000 across multiple cards. The minimum payments alone consumed nearly $800 per month, and once again the payment history showed my bank account as the consistent source of funds. The silence in the dining room was deafening as family members leaned forward to glimpse the papers I was systematically arranging before Patricia. Caroline's expression had shifted from embarrassment at her mother's outburst to growing shock as she began to understand the implications of what she was witnessing. James exchanged worried glances with his wife Sophie, clearly recognizing that their mother's dramatic accusations were being methodically demolished by cold, hard evidence. David sat frozen beside me, his face a mixture of gratitude and mortification as our private financial arrangements were exposed to his entire family. I could see him struggling with the public revelation of his struggles, but Patricia's vicious attack had made this level of transparency necessary. His mother had forced my hand by making such specific and damaging accusations in front of everyone. I pulled out my own bank statements next, highlighting the regular transfers that had been flowing from my accounts to David's for over a year. The amounts were substantial enough to make several family members gasp audibly as they processed the scope of my financial support. $2,000 here for his loan payment, $800 there for credit cards, $1,500 for his car payment and insurance. Month after month, the pattern was consistent and undeniable. Patricia's face had gone pale as the reality of our situation began to penetrate her carefully constructed narrative. She reached for the nearest document with trembling hands, studying the bank routing numbers and account details as if she could somehow make them disappear through sheer force of will. Her golden boy son, the successful investment analyst she had been bragging about to her friends, was being entirely supported by the woman she had just publicly branded a gold digger. The car payment documentation was particularly damaging to Patricia's assumptions. David drove a BMW that she had often mentioned as evidence of his financial success, apparently unaware that I had been making the $600 monthly payments since we moved in together. The insurance, maintenance, and even the premium gasoline that kept it running all came from my carefully managed budget, while David's own funds went entirely to servicing his existing debts. Richard had remained silent throughout his wife's earlier tirade, but now he was studying the financial documents with the sharp eye of someone who understood business and money management. As a former investment banker himself, he could immediately recognize the significance of what I was revealing. His son was drowning in debt while his daughter-in-law quietly kept him afloat, and the implications for the family's assumptions about their relationship were staggering. I opened my laptop and displayed our shared household budget spreadsheet, complete with color-coded categories that showed exactly who paid for what in our daily lives. Rent, utilities, groceries, household supplies, even the expensive wine we brought to family gatherings like this one, all came from my income while David's salary disappeared entirely into debt service. The meticulous record-keeping painted a picture of a woman managing not just her own finances, but an entire household's expenses. The grocery receipts alone told a devastating story about Patricia's assumption. I had saved every single receipt for the past year, organizing them by month to track our household expenses. The total amount I had spent on feeding us both was over $15,000, while David's contribution to food costs had been exactly zero. The woman Patricia had accused of bleeding her son dry had literally been putting food on his table every single day. Caroline finally found her voice, her legal training helping her process the implications of what she was seeing. She asked quietly how long this arrangement had been in place, and I explained that I had begun helping with David's expenses almost immediately after we moved in together. His financial situation had been deteriorating rapidly due to the combination of student loans, business debt, and credit card interest, and without intervention, he would have faced bankruptcy within months. The business failure that had contributed to David's current troubles was another area where Patricia's assumptions proved wildly inaccurate. She had always spoken proudly of her son's entrepreneurial spirit and his attempt to build his own company straight out of college. What she didn't realize was that the failed venture had left him with nearly $30,000 in business credit card debt that carried interest rates approaching 30% annually. I displayed the documentation of those business debts, showing how the monthly interest charges alone exceeded what many people spent on rent. David had been trapped in a cycle where his minimum payments barely covered the interest accumulation, ensuring that the principal balances continued to grow despite his best efforts to pay them down. My intervention had not only stabilized his situation but had actually begun to reduce the total debt burden for the first time in years. The health insurance revelation was particularly painful for Patricia to process. David's position at the investment firm provided basic coverage, but the deductibles and co-payments for his ongoing medical needs had created another significant monthly expense. I had quietly added him to my superior health insurance plan through my employer, absorbing the additional premium costs, while ensuring he received better care at a lower out-of-pocket cost. The professional development expenses that Patricia had always encouraged were another hidden drain on David's finances that I had been covering. Conference attendance, continuing education courses, professional association memberships, and even the expensive business attire his mother expected him to maintain all came from my budget. The image of success that Patricia valued so highly was being entirely subsidized by the woman she had just accused of financial parasitism. James had been studying the documents with increasing amazement, finally asking the question that everyone was thinking: how had I managed to support both David and myself while maintaining the lifestyle that the family had observed during our visit? The answer lay in my carefully managed financial planning and the substantial income differential between our respective careers that Patricia had never bothered to investigate. I opened my employment contract and recent pay stubs, revealing an annual compensation package that exceeded David's income by nearly $60,000. My pharmaceutical sales position included a generous base salary plus commission structure that rewarded high performance with substantial bonuses. The territory I managed was one of the company's most lucrative, and my track record of exceeding sales targets had resulted in consistent financial success. The vacation expenses that Patricia had criticized during previous family gatherings took on new meaning in light of these revelations. She had often made snide comments about our inability to join family trips or contribute to group vacation rentals, apparently assuming that David was being cheap or financially irresponsible. The reality was that every dollar of our discretionary income was being directed toward debt reduction and basic living expenses. I pulled out documentation of the vacation opportunities I had personally sacrificed to maintain our financial stability. Job offers in other cities that would have meant salary increases but would have destabilized David's recovery plan. Investment opportunities that I had foregone to maintain cash flow for his debt payment. Even simple personal pleasures like spa days or shopping trips that I had eliminated from my budget to ensure we could meet all our obligations. The credit report I had pulled for both of us painted a stark picture of our respective financial standings. My credit score was exceptional, reflecting years of responsible financial management and consistent payment history. David's score had been steadily declining due to high utilization ratios and the stress of managing multiple debt obligations simultaneously. My support had not only stabilized his financial situation, but had actually begun to improve his creditworthiness for the first time in years. Patricia was now studying each document with desperate intensity, as if she could find some flaw in the evidence that would restore her original narrative. She questioned the authenticity of the bank statements, wondered aloud whether the loan documents might be forgeries, and suggested that perhaps I had manipulated David into taking on debt that benefited me somehow. Each desperate attempt to salvage her accusations only made her appear more detached from reality. The family's growing understanding of our situation was evident in their shifting body language and facial expression. Caroline had moved from shock to what appeared to be admiration for my financial management skills and dedication to her brother. James was clearly recalculating everything he thought he knew about our relationship and David's career progress. Even the children at the table seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though they couldn't fully understand the implications. Richard finally broke his silence to ask about my long-term financial planning and whether this level of support was sustainable. His question revealed both genuine concern for our well-being and a dawning appreciation for the complexity of what I had been managing. I explained that I had developed a comprehensive debt reduction strategy that would eliminate David's obligations within 3 years, while maintaining our current lifestyle and beginning to build shared savings. The investment account statements I shared next showed how I had been preparing for our future even while managing David's current crisis. Despite carrying the full burden of our household expenses and his debt payments, I had continued to maximize my retirement contributions, and had even opened additional investment accounts for future home purchases and other major goals. The financial planning was sophisticated and forward-thinking, hardly the work of someone seeking to exploit a partner for financial gain. Patricia's attempts to question my motives became increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted against her assumption. She suggested that perhaps I was using David's debt as a form of control, keeping him dependent and unable to leave the relationship. The accusation was so far from our actual dynamic that David finally found his voice to defend both me and our partnership, explaining how my support had actually given him the freedom to focus on his career development without the constant stress of financial crisis. The professional development investments I had been funding were beginning to show results that Patricia hadn't recognized. David's recent promotion discussions at work were a direct result of his ability to attend important conferences and complete additional certifications that his peers couldn't afford. My financial support had actually enhanced his career prospects rather than limiting them, directly contradicting Patricia's narrative about manipulation and control. I displayed the correspondence between David and his company's human resources department regarding his upcoming promotion review. The salary increase he was expecting would finally allow him to begin contributing more substantially to our shared expenses and accelerate the debt reduction timeline. Far from creating dependency, my support had positioned him for greater financial independence and career success. The tax implications of our financial arrangement were another area where my careful planning was evident. I had consulted with a financial advisor to ensure that our joint tax filing maximized our refunds and took advantage of every available deduction. The professional guidance had saved us thousands of dollars annually while ensuring full compliance with all reporting requirements. Sophie, who had been quiet throughout the revelation, finally asked whether David's siblings had been aware of his financial struggle. The question highlighted one of the most painful aspects of the situation for David, who had been too proud to ask for family help even as his situation deteriorated. His silence about his troubles had allowed Patricia's assumptions to flourish unchallenged, creating the perfect conditions for her dramatic misinterpretation of our relationship. The insurance policies I had purchased for both of us revealed another layer of my long-term commitment to our partnership. Life insurance, disability coverage, and even umbrella liability protection all demonstrated my investment in our shared future, rather than any attempt to exploit his resource. The beneficiary designations and policy ownership structures had been carefully planned to protect both of us, regardless of what the future might bring. Patricia was now openly studying her son with new eyes, perhaps seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The successful young man she had been bragging about to her friends was actually struggling with serious financial challenges, while being quietly supported by a wife whose capabilities she had completely underestimated. The cognitive dissonance was clearly painful for her to process. I pulled out documentation of the legal consultation I had paid for regarding David's business debt and potential bankruptcy option. The attorney's assessment had confirmed that without intervention, David would have been forced to file for bankruptcy protection within 6 months of our moving in together. My financial support had not only prevented that outcome, but had actually positioned him for a complete financial recovery. The credit counseling sessions I had arranged and paid for were another investment in David's long-term financial education and independence. Rather than simply throwing money at the problem, I had insisted that we work with professionals to understand the root causes of his financial struggles and develop strategies to prevent similar problems in the future. The approach was comprehensive and focused on sustainable solutions rather than temporary fixes. Caroline was now asking detailed questions about the debt reduction timeline and our plans for the future. Her legal background helped her appreciate the complexity of what I had been managing, and she seemed genuinely impressed by the strategic approach I had taken to resolve David's financial crisis. The conversation was becoming more collaborative as family members began to understand the reality of our situation. The emergency fund I had established for unexpected expenses was another sign of my commitment to our financial stability. Despite carrying the full burden of household costs and debt payments, I had managed to save several $1,000s for contingencies like medical emergencies or job loss. The fund represented months of careful budgeting and sacrifice, ensuring that we would be prepared for any crisis that might arise. James asked about my own career development and whether supporting David had required me to sacrifice my professional goals. The question gave me an opportunity to explain how I had actually accelerated my own career advancement to increase our household income and improve our long-term prospects. The additional responsibilities I had taken on at work had led to promotion opportunities and salary increases that benefited both of us. The professional networking expenses I had been covering for David were already showing results in his job search and career development efforts. The industry connections he had made through conferences and professional associations were opening doors that would have remained closed without those investments. Once again, my financial support was enhancing rather than limiting his professional opportunity. Patricia was now asking David directly about his awareness of the extent of my financial support, clearly hoping that perhaps he had been unaware of some aspects of our arrangement. His honest acknowledgement of my contributions and his gratitude for my support only further undermined her attempts to find fault with our partnership. The love and respect between us was evident in every exchange, contradicting any suggestion of manipulation or exploitation. The household management responsibilities I had assumed were another area where Patricia's assumptions proved incorrect. She had often criticized what she perceived as my lack of domestic skills, apparently unaware that I was managing not only all our finances, but also most of the practical aspects of running our household. The detailed budgets, bill payment schedules, and financial planning documents revealed a level of organization and competence that impressed even Rich. The sacrifice I had made in turning down the California job offer was perhaps the most significant example of my commitment to David's recovery and our relationship's success. The position would have meant a 40% salary increase and significant career advancement opportunities, but it would have disrupted the debt reduction plan we had carefully constructed. My decision to stay had prioritized our partnership over my individual career advancement. Richard was now asking about the investment strategies I had been using to manage our finances and plan for the future. His questions revealed both respect for my financial acumen and surprise at discovering such sophisticated planning from someone his wife had dismissed as a gold digger. The conversation was becoming increasingly focused on financial strategy rather than family drama. The insurance claim I had handled when David's car was damaged in an accident was another example of my comprehensive management of our affair. I had dealt with the insurance company, arranged for repairs, managed the rental car, and ensured that David could continue commuting to work without interruption. The incident had cost us nearly $2,000 in deductibles and related expenses, all covered by my emergency plan. Patricia's final attempt to salvage her narrative involved suggesting that perhaps I was exaggerating the extent of David's debt or my contributions to make myself appear more generous than I actually was. The suggestion was so desperate and easily disproven that it actually made the family more sympathetic to my position. Every document was independently verifiable, every payment was traceable, and every claim I had made was supported by solid evidence. The revelation was complete, and Patricia's dramatic accusations lay in ruins around her. The gold digger she had attempted to expose publicly was actually the financial foundation that had prevented her son from losing everything he had worked to build. The generous support, careful planning, and personal sacrifice I had demonstrated were the opposite of everything she had accused me of, and the documentation was too comprehensive to dispute or dismiss. As the family absorbed the full implications of what they had learned, the dynamics around the Easter table had shifted permanently. Patricia's authority as the family's moral and financial arbiter had been shattered by her spectacular misreading of our situation. David's struggles and my support had been exposed, but so had my competence, dedication, and genuine love for her son. The woman she had tried to drive away had proven herself to be exactly the kind of partner any mother should hope her child would find. The silence that followed my comprehensive financial revelation stretched across the dining room like a heavy blanket, broken only by the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Patricia sat motionless in her chair, staring at the mountain of evidence that had completely demolished her carefully constructed narrative about my character and motivation. Her face had gone through several color changes during my presentation, from confident pink, to shocked white, to what was now an uncomfortable shade of red, as the full implications of her public humiliation began to sink in. David reached for my hand under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of gratitude and solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by his family member. The man Patricia had portrayed as my victim was clearly anything but, and his obvious love and appreciation for my support made her accusations appear even more ridiculous in hindsight. The dynamic she had tried to expose as manipulative and exploitative had been revealed as a partnership built on genuine care and mutual respect. Caroline was the first to break the uncomfortable silence, her voice carefully measured as she addressed her mother directly. She pointed out that Patricia owed me a sincere apology for her unfounded accusations and public attack on my character. The legal precision in Caroline's tone suggested that she understood exactly how damaging her mother's words could have been if they had gone unchallenged, and she was clearly disturbed by the injustice of the situation. Patricia's response was a barely audible mumble that might have been an attempt at an apology, but it lacked any real conviction or acknowledgement of the severity of her mistake. She seemed more focused on processing her own embarrassment than on making amends for the damage she had tried to inflict on my reputation. The contrast between her earlier theatrical confidence and her current deflated posture was striking and somewhat satisfying to observe. James had been studying the financial documents with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle, and when he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. He asked me directly how I had managed to carry such a significant financial burden while maintaining my own career and personal goals. The question gave me an opportunity to explain the strategic planning and sacrifice that had made our arrangement possible. I described how I had restructured my entire budget when David and I moved in together, eliminating virtually all discretionary spending to free up money for his debt payments. The designer clothes I had once enjoyed buying became a luxury I couldn't afford. The expensive gym membership was replaced with home workouts and running in the park. Even small pleasures like frequent dinners out or weekend shopping trips had been systematically eliminated to ensure we could meet all our financial obligations. The meal planning and grocery budgeting alone had become a part-time job as I worked to maximize our food budget while maintaining good nutrition and variety. I had learned to shop sales cycles, use coupons strategically, and cook large batches of meals that could be frozen and reused throughout the week. The domestic skills that Patricia had often criticized me for lacking had actually been developed out of necessity as I worked to stretch every dollar as far as possible. Sophie asked about my own family's reaction to our financial arrangement, and I explained that my parents had been supportive but concerned about the sustainability of such an intensive support system. They had raised me to be financially independent and self-sufficient, and watching me take on someone else's debt burden had been difficult for them to accept initially. However, they had come to respect my decision after seeing how committed David and I were to resolving the situation together. The conversation with my parents about David's financial situation had been one of the most difficult discussions of our relationship. They had questioned whether I was making a mistake by involving myself so deeply in his problems, and they had worried that I might be setting myself up for financial disaster if the relationship didn't work out. Their concerns were valid and based on genuine love for me, but they had ultimately accepted my decision after meeting David and seeing our partnership firsthand. Richard had remained largely silent throughout the revelation, but now he was asking detailed questions about our debt reduction strategy and timeline. His banker's instincts had kicked in as he evaluated the soundness of our financial planning and the likelihood of success for our approach. The questions were technical and sophisticated, treating me as a peer rather than the gold digger his wife had attempted to portray. I walked him through the spreadsheet model I had created to track our progress and project future milestones. The debt avalanche method I had chosen prioritized the highest interest rate obligations first while maintaining minimum payments on everything else. The mathematical efficiency of the approach was evident in the projected savings on interest payments over the life of the plan. Richard nodded approvingly as he followed the logic of each strategic decision. The emergency fund strategy I had implemented was another area where Richard's expertise allowed him to appreciate the sophistication of my plan. Despite the tight budget constraints, I had insisted on maintaining a cash reserve for unexpected expenses that might otherwise force us to take on additional debt. The fund had already proven its value during David's car accident and a minor medical emergency that had occurred earlier in the year. Patricia finally found her voice again, but instead of the apology her family was expecting, she launched into a defensive explanation of her motivations and concerns. She claimed that her accusations had been based on genuine worry about David's well-being and her observation of what she perceived as troubling patterns in our relationship.
The attempt to justify her attack only made her appear more unreasonable as she continued to avoid taking responsibility for her mistake. Caroline's legal training was evident as she systematically dismantled her mother's defensive arguments, pointing out the flaws in Patricia's logic and the unfairness of her assumption. She noted that Patricia had never made any attempt to understand our actual situation before launching her public attack, and she questioned whether such behavior was appropriate regardless of her concerns about David's well-being. The family dynamics were shifting in real time as Patricia's position as the moral authority of the family came under serious question for the first time. Her children were clearly uncomfortable with her refusal to acknowledge her mistake, and even Richard seemed embarrassed by her continued attempts to justify the unjustifiable. The Easter gathering that was supposed to celebrate family unity had instead exposed serious rifts in their relationship. David finally spoke up to defend me more forcefully, his voice carrying an edge of anger that his family rarely heard from him. He pointed out that I had never asked for anything in return for my financial support, never held the debt payments over his head as leverage, and never made him feel ashamed or inadequate for needing help. The emotional intelligence and maturity I had shown throughout our financial crisis stood in stark contrast to his mother's dramatic accusations and defensive behavior. The business mentorship I had arranged for David through my professional network was another example of my investment in his long-term success rather than any attempt to maintain control over him. The executive coach I had hired to help him develop leadership skills and strategic thinking had cost several $1,000s, but the investment was already paying dividends in his career advancement and confidence level. James asked about the impact of our financial arrangement on our relationship dynamics and whether the stress had created problems between us. The question gave me an opportunity to explain how working together to solve David's financial crisis had actually strengthened our partnership and improved our communication skill. The shared goal and mutual sacrifice had created a deeper level of trust and intimacy than many couples ever achieve. The counseling sessions I had insisted we attend during the most stressful periods of debt management had been another investment in our relationship's long-term success. The therapist had helped us develop healthy communication patterns around money and financial stress, ensuring that our temporary financial imbalance didn't create permanent relationship problems. The professional guidance had been worth every dollar I had spent on it. Patricia was now attempting a different approach, suggesting that perhaps I had been well-meaning, but misguided in my approach to David's financial problem.
She implied that my support might have prevented him from learning important lessons about financial responsibility and consequences. The suggestion was particularly galling, given that her own financial choices and expectations had contributed significantly to his current situation. I responded by explaining the comprehensive financial education component of our debt reduction plan, including the books we had read together, the online courses David had completed, and the workshops we had attended on budgeting and investment strategy. Far from shielding him from financial reality, my support had been paired with intensive education designed to prevent similar problems in the future. The credit counseling sessions had been particularly valuable in helping David understand the psychological and behavioral patterns that had contributed to his financial difficulties. The counselor had identified several areas where his family's expectations and lifestyle modeling had created unrealistic assumptions about money management and debt utilization. The insights had been uncomfortable but necessary for his long-term financial health. Caroline was now asking about our plans for the future and how we intended to transition from our current arrangement to a more balanced financial partnership. The question demonstrated her understanding that our situation was temporary and strategic rather than permanent or exploitative. I outlined our timeline for David's debt elimination and our plans for shared financial goals once his obligations were resolved. The investment planning we had begun for our post-debt future included contributions to shared retirement accounts, a down payment fund for our first home purchase, and educational savings for the children we hope to have someday. The forward-thinking approach demonstrated my commitment to our partnership's long-term success rather than any short-term financial advantage. Richard was now openly expressing his admiration for my financial management skills and strategic thinking, suggesting that I should consider a career in financial planning or consulting. The compliment was particularly meaningful coming from someone with his background and expertise and it provided a stark contrast to his wife's earlier characterization of my abilities and motivation. The tax planning strategies I had implemented to maximize our refunds and minimize our obligations had saved us thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. The careful timing of deductions, income shifting, and retirement contribution optimization had required significant research and planning, but the results had been substantial. Every dollar saved had been directed toward debt reduction or emergency fund building. Patricia was becoming increasingly isolated as her family members continued to express support and admiration for my efforts on David's behalf. Her refusal to acknowledge her mistake or offer a genuine apology was creating additional tension beyond the original conflict. The Easter gathering that she had intended to use for my public humiliation was instead becoming a showcase for my character and capabilities. The household management systems I had developed to track our expenses and monitor our progress had become increasingly sophisticated over time. The spreadsheets and budgeting apps I used provided real-time visibility into our financial status and helped us make informed decisions about spending and saving. The organizational skills required to manage such a complex financial situation were impressive even to family members who worked in finance and law. Sophie asked about the emotional toll of carrying such a significant financial burden, and I acknowledged that there had been difficult moments when the stress felt overwhelming. However, I explained that the clear progress we were making toward our goals and David's obvious appreciation for my support made the sacrifices worthwhile. The temporary nature of our arrangement also made it easier to maintain perspective during challenging periods. The professional development investments I had made in David were already showing concrete results in his career advancement discussions. His manager had specifically mentioned his improved leadership skills and strategic thinking as factors in his upcoming promotion consideration. The coaching and training I had funded were paying dividends that would benefit both of us for years to come. James was now asking about the lessons I had learned from managing such a complex financial situation, and whether I would recommend a similar approach to other couples facing debt problems. I explained that every situation was unique and required careful analysis of the specific circumstances, but that open communication and shared commitment to solutions were essential ingredients for success. The financial planning software I had purchased to model different debt reduction scenarios had been invaluable in developing our strategy and tracking our progress. The ability to visualize the long-term impact of different payment approaches had helped us make informed decisions and maintain motivation during difficult periods. The investment in proper tools and resources had been essential to our success. Patricia made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative by suggesting that perhaps my financial support had been excessive and unnecessary. She implied that David could have managed his debt problems independently if he had simply been more disciplined about his spending and lifestyle choices. The suggestion ignored the mathematical reality of his situation and the impossible nature of debt service on his salary alone. Caroline immediately challenged her mother's assessment, pointing out that Patricia herself had encouraged David's expensive education and lifestyle choices without apparently understanding their financial implications. The observation highlighted the hypocrisy of criticizing me for solving problems that Patricia had helped create through her own expectations and demands. The business failure that had contributed to David's debt burden was another area where Patricia's assumptions proved problematic. She had always spoken proudly of her son's entrepreneurial ambitions without acknowledging the financial risks involved or offering any practical support for managing those risks. My intervention had prevented a complete financial collapse while preserving his credit and career prospects. Richard was now asking about our investment strategy for the post-debt period, and whether we had considered real estate or other wealth-building approaches. The conversation had evolved from defending my character to planning our financial future, a transformation that highlighted how completely the family's understanding of our situation had changed. The retirement planning I had continued despite our current financial constraints demonstrated my long-term commitment to our partnership and our shared future. Even while supporting David's debt payments, I had maintained my own retirement contributions and had researched strategies for catching up on his retirement savings once his debt was eliminated. The comprehensive approach showed sophisticated financial thinking and genuine partnership. Patricia's final surrender came when she quietly asked David if he was happy with our arrangement, and whether he felt that I was treating him fairly. His enthusiastic affirmation of our partnership and his obvious gratitude for my support finally silenced her objections and criticism. The love and respect between us was evident to everyone at the table, making her earlier accusations appear even more misguided. The apology that Patricia finally offered was grudging and incomplete, but it represented at least some acknowledgement of her mistake. She admitted that she had been wrong about my motivations and character, though she stopped short of taking full responsibility for her public attack on my reputation. The family's disappointment in her behavior was evident in their subdued responses to her belated attempt at making amends. Caroline suggested that the family should focus on supporting our financial recovery efforts rather than criticizing our methods or motivation. She offered to help research additional debt reduction strategies and to provide legal advice if any of David's business obligations required professional intervention. The practical support was exactly what we needed, and represented a complete reversal from the morning's hostile environment. James offered to include David in some of his business networking activities and to introduce him to potential mentors in the investment industry. The professional connections could be valuable for David's career development and demonstrated the family's new understanding of our situation and goals. The offers of help replaced Patricia's accusations as the dominant family response to our circumstance. Richard suggested that I should consider teaching financial planning courses or writing about debt reduction strategies, given my obvious expertise and successful track record. The suggestion was both flattering and practical, as it recognized skills I had developed through necessity and could potentially monetize in the future. The transformation from gold digger to financial expert was complete in his assessment. The meal that had begun with Patricia's dramatic accusations ended with the family working together to support our financial recovery and future planning. The Easter gathering that was supposed to humiliate me had instead showcased my capabilities and strengthened my position within the family structure. Patricia's attempt to drive me away had backfired spectacularly, creating deeper connections with David's siblings and even earning his father's respect. The documentation I packed away after our discussion represented months of careful record-keeping and strategic planning that had not only solved David's financial crisis, but had also protected my reputation when it came under attack. The evidence had been comprehensive enough to withstand any scrutiny and convincing enough to transform the family's understanding of our relationship completely. As we prepared to leave the family gathering, the contrast between the morning's hostile environment and the afternoon's supportive atmosphere was remarkable. Patricia's accusations had been thoroughly debunked, my character had been vindicated, and our financial partnership had been revealed as a model of mutual support and strategic thinking rather than exploitation or manipulation. The drive home was quiet as David and I both processed the emotional intensity of the day's events. His gratitude for my financial support had always been evident in private, but having to defend our relationship publicly had been difficult for both of us. However, the family's ultimate understanding and support made the temporary discomfort worthwhile. The follow-up conversations with family members over the next few days confirmed that Patricia's accusations had been thoroughly rejected and that my position within the family had actually been strengthened by the confrontation. Caroline called to apologize for her mother's behavior and to offer additional legal assistance with our financial planning. James invited us to join a couple's investment club that he and Sophie belonged to. Richard's email later that week included several financial planning resources and an offer to review our investment strategy once David's debt was eliminated. The transformation from skeptical in-law to financial mentor represented a complete reversal from the morning's dynamics and demonstrated how thoroughly the truth had changed everyone's perspective. Patricia's subsequent attempts to rebuild her relationship with me were awkward and uncomfortable, but they represented some acknowledgement of her mistake and desire to repair the damage she had caused. The process would take time and would require genuine changes in her attitude and behavior, but the possibility of eventual reconciliation existed if she was willing to put in the effort. The Easter confrontation that had threatened to destroy my relationship with David's family had instead strengthened it by forcing everyone to confront the reality of our situation rather than relying on assumptions and prejudices. The truth had been more powerful than Patricia's accusations, and my documentation had been comprehensive enough to eliminate any reasonable doubt about my motivations or character. The financial recovery plan that had been our private project became a family effort as David's siblings offered various forms of support and encouragement. The isolation that had characterized our debt reduction efforts was replaced by a network of family support that made our goals more achievable and our burden more manageable. 6 months later, David's promotion came through with a salary increase that allowed him to begin contributing more substantially to our shared expenses and debt payment. The career development investments I had funded were paying dividends exactly as we had projected, validating our strategic approach and accelerating our timeline for financial independence. 1 year after the Easter confrontation, we had eliminated over 60% of David's debt and had begun building substantial shared savings for the first time in our relationship. The financial partnership that Patricia had attacked as exploitative had evolved into a model of mutual support and shared success that exceeded even our optimistic projection. The family relationships that had been strained by Patricia's accusations were stronger than ever, built on a foundation of truth and mutual respect rather than assumptions and prejudices. The Easter gathering that had nearly destroyed my place in the family had instead secured it permanently by demonstrating my character under pressure and my genuine commitment to David's well-being and success. The wedding planning that began 18 months after the Easter confrontation served as the ultimate test of how completely the family dynamics had shifted in my favor. Patricia, who had once questioned my worthiness to be part of the Brennan family, now found herself in the uncomfortable position of planning a celebration for the woman she had publicly attacked as a gold digger. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all Patricia herself, who approached each wedding-related conversation with visible discomfort and forced enthusiasm. David and I had decided to renew our vows in a proper ceremony after achieving our financial goals ahead of schedule. The original courthouse wedding had been a practical decision made during the height of his debt crisis. But now that we were financially stable and his family relationships had been repaired, we wanted to celebrate our partnership with the people who mattered most to us. The symbolism of the ceremony was powerful, representing not just our love but our triumph over the obstacles that had once threatened to tear us apart. The venue selection process revealed just how dramatically Patricia's attitude toward me had evolved. When I suggested a modest reception at a local country club, she immediately countered with offers to host the celebration at the family estate or to help fund a more elaborate affair at one of Westchester County's premier wedding venues. The woman who had once accused me of bleeding her son dry was now volunteering to spend thousands of dollars on my wedding reception. Caroline had been appointed as my unofficial wedding planning advisor, a role she embraced with enthusiasm and legal precision. Her attention to detail and organizational skills complemented my own planning abilities perfectly, and we worked together to create an event that would celebrate not just our marriage but the family unity that had emerged from our earlier conflict. The collaborative planning process strengthened our relationship and provided numerous opportunities for Patricia to demonstrate her reformed attitude toward me. The guest list compilation became an exercise in diplomacy as we balanced family expectations with our own preferences and budget constraints. My parents had initially been hesitant about attending such an elaborate celebration, given their memories of the family tensions they had witnessed during previous gatherings. However, their concerns were alleviated when they met the transformed version of David's family and experienced the warmth and acceptance that had replaced the earlier hostility. James had volunteered to handle the photography coordination, leveraging his architectural background to ensure that the venue and lighting would be perfect for capturing memorable images. His professional eye for visual composition and his understanding of the family's emotional journey made him the ideal person to document our celebration. The care and attention he devoted to the project demonstrated his genuine affection for both David and me. Sophie took charge of coordinating the floral arrangements, working closely with the family's longtime florist to create displays that would complement the venue's natural beauty while staying within our budget. Her artistic sensibilities and practical experience planning her own wedding made her an invaluable resource throughout the process. The collaboration gave us multiple opportunities to bond over shared creative vision and wedding planning challenges. Richard's contribution to the wedding planning was characteristically financial and strategic. He offered to cover the cost of the reception dinner as his wedding gift to us,
explaining that he wanted to demonstrate his appreciation for my role in helping David achieve financial stability. The generous offer was both touching and significant, representing his complete acceptance of me as a valued member of the family and his recognition of my contributions to David's success. The menu planning sessions revealed Patricia's desperate desire to make amends for her earlier behavior through elaborate gestures and expensive choices. She suggested premium wine selections, imported delicacies, and multiple course options that would have cost more than some people's annual salary. While I appreciated her enthusiasm, I had to diplomatically redirect her toward more reasonable choices that aligned with our values and budget priorities. The dress shopping expedition became an unexpected bonding experience with Patricia, who had volunteered to accompany me to the bridal boutiques despite our complicated history. Her knowledge of fashion and formal attire proved invaluable as we navigated the overwhelming array of options, and her genuine excitement about finding the perfect dress seemed to surprise even her. The afternoon spent together allowed us to have honest conversations about our past conflicts and future relationships. David's bachelor party planning fell to James, who organized a weekend retreat that focused on outdoor activities and quality time with friends rather than the typical evening of excessive drinking and questionable entertainment. The thoughtful approach reflected the family's evolved understanding of David's character and priorities, as well as their respect for our relationship and shared value. The celebration strengthened his bonds with his brothers-in-law and provided opportunities for deeper conversations about marriage and partnership. My bachelorette party was coordinated by Caroline, who planned a spa weekend that included both my friends and David's female family member. The relaxing environment provided perfect opportunities for informal conversations and relationship building, allowing everyone to get to know each other better outside the formal structure of family gatherings. Patricia's participation in the weekend was initially awkward but ultimately successful in furthering our reconciliation process. The financial planning discussions that accompanied our wedding preparations highlighted how completely our situation had transformed since the Easter confrontation. David was now contributing equally to our shared expenses and had begun building his own emergency fund and investment portfolio. The debt that had once consumed his entire income was now reduced to manageable monthly payments that would be eliminated within the year. Our joint investment strategy had evolved to include aggressive saving for a house down payment, maximized retirement contributions, and a shared travel fund for the honeymoon and future vacation. The financial partnership that Patricia had once criticized as exploitative had become a model of collaborative planning and mutual support that impressed even Richard with its sophistication and success. The insurance planning updates that accompanied our vow renewal included increased life insurance coverage and updated beneficiary designations that reflected our strengthened financial position and shared assets. The policies represented our confidence in our relationship's permanence and our commitment to protecting each other's interests regardless of what the future might bring. The comprehensive coverage demonstrated the mature financial planning that had replaced the crisis management of our early relationship. The wedding day itself dawned clear and beautiful, with perfect weather that seemed to reflect the harmony that had been achieved within the family despite the rocky beginning of our relationship. The preparation process was smooth and collaborative, with each family member contributing their assigned responsibilities while maintaining the positive atmosphere that had characterized our planning process. Patricia's behavior on the wedding day was the ultimate demonstration of her transformed attitude toward me and our relationship. She went out of her way to ensure that every detail was perfect, that all vendors were properly coordinated, and that any potential problems were resolved before they could affect our celebration. Her dedication to making our day special was both touching and slightly overwhelming, representing her desire to make up for past mistakes through present kindness. The ceremony itself was intimate and meaningful, with vows that acknowledged both our love and the challenges we had overcome together. David's words about my financial support during his darkest period brought tears to many eyes, including Patricia's, as the family was reminded of the depth of my commitment to their son and brother. The public acknowledgement of my sacrifices and support validated everything I had endured during the difficult early period of our relationship. The reception that followed was a celebration not just of our marriage, but of the family unity that had emerged from our earlier conflict. Patricia's toast was particularly moving, as she publicly acknowledged her initial misjudgment of my character and expressed her gratitude for my role in David's life and success. The apology was more complete and heartfelt than anything she had offered previously, and it seemed to provide closure for the family regarding the Easter incident. Caroline's maid of honor speech focused on the strength and resilience I had demonstrated throughout the financial crisis and family conflicts, positioning me as an inspiration for young women facing similar challenges in their own relationship. Her legal training was evident in the carefully structured argument she made for partnership, mutual support, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to understand the true dynamics of a relationship. James's best man speech for David emphasized the positive changes that marriage had brought to his brother's life, not just financially but in terms of confidence, maturity, and overall happiness. The transformation he described was comprehensive and lasting, affecting every aspect of David's personal and professional development. The speech highlighted the mutually beneficial nature of our partnership and the fallacy of viewing our relationship through the lens of exploitation or manipulation. Richard's father of the groom remarks focused on the financial wisdom and strategic thinking I had brought to the family, positioning me as a valuable addition not just to David's life, but to the entire Brennan clan. His public recognition of my business acumen and financial management skills represented a complete reversal from the assumptions that had characterized the family's initial response to our relationship. The dancing that followed dinner provided opportunities for individual conversations with family members who wanted to express their personal appreciation for my role in David's recovery and success. Each conversation reinforced the transformation that had occurred in family relationships and demonstrated the depth of acceptance and respect I had earned through my actions, rather than my words. Patricia's private conversation with me during a quiet moment in the evening was perhaps the most significant interaction of the entire celebration. She offered a detailed and heartfelt apology for her behavior at Easter, acknowledging not just her mistake but the pain and humiliation she had caused me. Her recognition of my character and contributions was complete and genuine, representing true personal growth rather than mere social obligation. The financial gifts we received from family members reflected their understanding of our goals and priorities, with contributions to our house down payment fund rather than traditional wedding present. The practical support demonstrated their investment in our future success and their confidence in our financial planning abilities. The generosity was particularly meaningful given the family's initial skepticism about our relationship. The honeymoon planning that followed our wedding was the first major financial decision we made as equal partners rather than in the context of crisis management and debt reduction. The ability to plan and pay for a luxury vacation together represented a milestone in our relationship's evolution and a celebration of our financial recovery. The trip itself was a reward for the sacrifices and hard work that had brought us to this point. The house hunting process that began 6 months after our wedding demonstrated how completely our financial situation had been transformed since the early days of our relationship. We were able to qualify for a substantial mortgage based on our combined income and excellent credit scores, with a down payment that exceeded 20% of the purchase price. The home buying process was exciting rather than stressful, representing achievement rather than struggle. The family's involvement in our house hunting was enthusiastic and supportive, with Richard offering financial advice and Caroline providing legal guidance throughout the process. Patricia volunteered to help with interior decorating and James offered architectural consulting for any renovations we might want to undertake. The collaborative approach to our major life decisions had replaced the earlier pattern of criticism and interference. The housewarming party we hosted 6 months later provided the perfect opportunity to showcase the life we had built together through partnership, sacrifice, and mutual support. The beautiful home, successful careers, and strong family relationships we had achieved stood in stark contrast to Patricia's earlier predictions about our relationship's trajectory. The celebration was both a personal triumph and a vindication of the choices we had made during our most difficult period. The investment portfolio review we conducted on our second wedding anniversary revealed the impressive wealth we had accumulated through disciplined saving and strategic planning. The financial foundation we had built together exceeded even our optimistic projections from the early days of our debt reduction plan. The success validated every sacrifice we had made and every difficult decision we had endured during our financial recovery. The family financial planning session that Richard organized for all his children provided an opportunity to share our strategies and insights with David's siblings, positioning us as experts rather than charity cases. The reversal in roles was particularly satisfying given the assumptions that had characterized our early interactions with the family. Our success had become a model for others to follow rather than a problem for others to solve. Patricia's birthday celebration the following year included a heartfelt thank you speech in which she credited me with saving her son from financial ruin and helping him achieve success she had never imagined possible. The public acknowledgement was the final step in our reconciliation process and represented her complete acceptance of me as the daughter-in-law she had initially rejected. The transformation in our relationship was as dramatic as our financial recovery had been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.